Napoleon Bonaparte and George Washington were some of the most influential leaders in history. Charisma just oozed out of their system as millions upon millions were drawn to their leadership. In spite of these, they've made some pretty dumb decisions throughout their lifetime, reminding us once again that you can never have it all. Here are history's 9 worst choices made by famous leaders. Number 9. Joseph Stalin. Being one of the greatest revolutionaries and Soviet politicians this world has known, I don't think Joseph Stalin felt dumb about being called nasty. One of his most threatening commands was to never be disturbed in his bedroom, and terrified guards made sure nobody dared to disobey this rule. On March 1st of 1953, Stalin didn't leave his room. Fear overwhelmed concern and nobody dared to knock. It wasn't until midnight before the guards gathered up the courage to break in. They found Stalin on the floor bathing in his own urine and suffering a stroke. He died within 4 days. Number 8. Napoleon Bonaparte. In June 1812, Napoleon invaded Russia with more than 600,000 men, one of the largest armies ever assembled for battle. He was so confident of victory that he predicted that the war wouldn't last more than 20 days. However, Napoleon was shamefully unaware of the lice infestations, subsequent typhus infections, food shortages, and brutal Russian temperatures. In the end, Napoleon was escorted by Russian troops back to France with less than 100,000 men. How embarrassing. Number 7. George Washington. Being an accomplished colonel was just one of the assets that made George Washington the first American president. Just like his life story, however, his military history was not smooth sailing either. In 1756, George had an encounter with Joseph Cullen de Jumonville, who was on an expedition in the Ohio Valley claiming lands for France. The two countries weren't in conflict yet, but Washington ordered an attack on de Jumonville's camp, which caused a fatal blow. This mistake triggered the 7 Years' War, and Washington suffered his first battle defeat not long after. Number 6. Ala ad-Din Muhammad. Genghis Khan, the ruler of the largest contiguous empire in history, sought to open diplomatic trade relations with Ala ad-Din Muhammad, the Shah of the Khwarezmid Empire, which is modern-day Iraq and Iran. However, the Shah rejected the offer and beheaded a Mongol diplomat, which was a wrong move. Khan was enraged and sent an estimated 200,000 warriors to tear their empire apart. Number 5. Christopher Columbus. As history narrates, Christopher Columbus was one heck of an explorer. But did you know that this discoverer sucked in governing? As a token of appreciation, the Spanish king and queen made Christopher Columbus the governor of Santo Domingo. Taking advantage of his position, Columbus and his brothers stole profits from the government. They also mistreated settlers who were trying to start a life in the New World. Hearing the news, the furious king and queen forced him back to Spain in chains. Number 4. Caligula. Caligula was Rome's third and craziest emperor. During his chaotic reign, Caligula declared himself a god, utterly humiliating those in high command. But his dumbest move was his ridiculous and somewhat comical revenge against Neptune, the mythical sea god. He commanded his army to wade through the ocean, fight with the waves, and collect seashells before claiming triumph over Neptune. He was declared insane. A fed-up guard stabbed him to death. Well, that definitely sunk his boat. Number 3. Qin Shi Huang. Qin Shi Huang solely reigned over 7 kingdoms and became China's first emperor. Despite having almost everything, Huang had an obsession with finding the elixir for immortality. He spent the last years of his life badgering and forcing every physician to give him answers. Having enough of the madness, one of these alchemists finally convinced him that he found the magic pills. Without hesitation, Huang swallowed the bait. What was given to him was poisonous mercury, and Huang passed away shortly afterward. Number 2. Japanese Admiral Kurita. History's greatest naval battle was the Battle of Leyte Gulf in 1944. American Admiral William F. Halsey got played when the Japanese used aircraft carriers as bait. Halsey steamed off his powerful fleet to attack and left behind only a small fleet of escort carriers that were not fit for counterattacks. While Halsey was chasing the Japanese decoys, a mighty fleet of Japanese battleships and heavy cruisers showed up north, under the command of Japanese Admiral Kurita. The only thing standing between the Japanese and the Americans at Leyte Gulf was an underwhelming collection of carriers called Taffy 3, under the command of Admiral Clifton Sprague. Sprague knew that his gun stood no chance against armored Japanese battleships, but he also knew that 1,000 of Americans would perish if the Japanese reached Leyte, so Sprague ordered Taffy 3 into a suicidal attack. They made desperate charges supported by planes flown from escort carriers, dropping explosives that were pretty much useless against the Japanese ships, just to discomfit the enemy. So reckless were their delusive attacks that the Japanese admiral was convinced that the resistance he faced was far greater than it actually was. So Kurita, who had an enormous victory in his grasp, if he only steamed on for another hour, turned his ships around and retreated, giving the Americans a miraculous victory. I guess it's safe to say that the player got played. Number 1. Adolf Hitler. Luckily, Nazi Germany's defeat in World War II was helped by some major mistakes by Adolf Hitler himself. One such mistake was the Führer's foolish investment of limited German resources in the so-called wonder weapons or vengeance weapons, such as the V2 rocket. This was one of the most wastefully expensive weapons which inflicted relatively little damage. During its 9 months of deployment, V2s killed 2,754 people. Most of them were not soldiers but civilians whose deaths, while horrendous, did not affect the Allies by much. In contrast, an estimated 20,000 slave laborers died while manufacturing the V2. That gave the rocket the tragic distinction of being the only weapon in history whose production cost more lives than its usage. Eventually, Hitler's illogical obsession with superweapons blinded him from the concept of relative cost effectiveness. Using normal weapons at a fraction of the cost would have freed up scarce resources for other uses that could have better served the German war effort. Nonetheless, it was a stupid decision for the good of humanity. Comment down below which fact blew your mind away. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications for more Trekonscious Rex mind-chomping historical thoughts.